The following half-hour show is a paid political program and is not endorsed by this station, management, or staff.
The following program is sponsored by Excalibur Insurance Management Services.
We are pleased to bring you today a regular guest, although it's his first appearance this season, our 10th year. And that is United States Congressman Matt Cartwright, who represents Pennsylvania's 8th Congressional District. Matt was first sworn in, believe it or not, 10 years ago, on January 3rd, 2013. More recently, on November 8th, 2022, he was reelected to his 6th term. In Congress, Matt has committed himself to working across the aisle, to advocate for working families. His priorities include strengthening the middle class, creating jobs, ensuring quality health care, protecting seniors, and supporting veterans and military families. On all accounts, he has delivered. He has introduced over 60 pieces of legislation and more bipartisan bills than any other House Democrat. You'll remember that Matt serves on the powerful House Appropriations Committee and is on the Appropriations Subcommittees for Commerce, Justice, and Science, Financial Services, and General Government. He is also on the Subcommittee for Military, Construction, and Veterans Affairs. He is also a member of the House Natural Resources Committee. Matt is a co-chair of the House Democratic Policy and Communications Committee. Educationally, Matt graduated magna cum laude with a history degree from Hamilton College. He earned his Juris Doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania Law School and was a member of the prestigious University of Pennsylvania Law Review. On today's show, we will discuss the impasse between Democrats and Republicans on the legislative bill required to raise America's debt ceiling. I'm sure you'll remember that two of our previous guests, both Congressman Scott Perry and Congressman Dan Muser from the Republican majority in the House, discussed those issues. If we fail to raise the debt ceiling, it will be a catastrophic default, which will affect our economy as well as all other economies throughout the world. We will also discuss today the very real possibility of an idea that Matt first championed years ago as far as a railway service between northeastern Pennsylvania and New York City.
This is the Volpe Report, a weekly news and political interview show examining the latest local, state, and national issues with Chuck Volpe. Insightful, informative, controversial, the area's premier political talk show, the Volpe Report.
Matt, welcome to the Volpe Report.
Nice to be back, Chuck.
Good to see you. A lot has happened since the last time you were on the Volpe Report. Let's go back to probably latter October of last year, pre-election of 2022 midterm, in which at that point you were in a dogfight, in a photo finish kind of race with Jim Bognet. You won with a little bit of comfort to spare and ran a great, strong race. I've said on this show, I think the entire Democratic Party in the state was helped, not just you and Susan Wild, I think John Fetterman. I think the fact that Democrats, after a decade, took over the House of Representatives of Pennsylvania were helped in no small way by the landslide obliteration that Josh Shapiro delivered to Doug Mastriano, who, by the way, I've referred to as right of Attila the Hun.
He's out there, all right. It's true that was a factor, but one thing I always caution, journalists when I'm talking to them, I ask them how, they want to know, well, what was the deciding factor in a race, right? And I said, well, I always say, how many words do you get allotted for this column? Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to boil it all down to one or two items. And gosh, Chuck, you know as well as anybody, a political campaign has a lot of moving parts. It's like a Swiss watch. And to say this race was determined by this factor, it's never the full story. And there were so many other things. Like, for example, it was the president's first midterm. Right. Difficult time for people in the president's own party, and that happens for Democrats and Republicans.
Trump got annihilated in his midterm in 2018. Exactly. You guys came into the majority.
That's it. And other things like, for example, the inflation. That was awful. I mean, we had better than 9% inflation raging And you know as well as I do, in northeastern Pennsylvania, we have so many people on fixed incomes, retirees, people living on Social Security. They're the ones that get murdered with inflation because their pay isn't going up. It's only their outlays that are going up. And so when they feel like they have to take out a mortgage to get a carton of eggs, that really hurts, and it's a tough political environment for all incumbents in that kind of situation. Those are two other of the factors. So, yeah, it was a dogfight, but we came out on top.
Well, the biggest loser, I heard a lot of people say, on election night was Donald Trump, and deservedly so.
I remember, you mentioned it, I remember when right after President Trump endorsed Dr. Oz, that was when Dr. Oz pulled ahead in that primary race against McCormick, yeah.
And remember, the winning margin, Matt, was like 0.07%. It was like 12,000 votes out of 3 million cast. 12,000 votes. An amazing, and of course that was the difference. And so, but his, specific fingerprints in the governor's race and U.S. Senate race had all kinds of down-ticket repercussions, which I had feared the impact of Donald Trump, but I did not realize just how toxic it had become. The election denial, the extremism, the extremist candidates, all of the above, I think, doomed not only the Republican Party in Pennsylvania, I think in places around the country.
Yeah, I have to go back and look. We would do polling as part of our campaign from time to time, and you'd throw in names like Joe Biden or Donald Trump. And I remember, Biden was not prospering at the time because of the inflation and all of that. But Donald Trump was underwater too.
Yeah, bad. But at any rate, Matt, as we had talked a little off camera, I'd like to start with the debt ceiling. I've had two recent guests, both Dan Muser and Scott Perry, from the Republican caucus, of course, and Scott especially in leadership in the caucus, but not only that, the chairman of the Powerful Freedom Caucus, inheriting a mantle that you, from a former friend of yours, Trey Gowdy, who had been that, and you from the Democratic side, him from the Republican side, still managed to deal like adults and actually become friends.
We played golf together, Trey Gowdy and I, and it's tough playing golf with Trey Gowdy because he's really good. It's about a 2 handicap.
Wow. But at any rate, take it up from there. They talked about the Republican view of the debt ceiling, and they also had some comments on the State of the Union as well. But take it from there. The Democratic response, if you will.
Well, this is, here's the truth, is that the debt ceiling is something that does not appear in the Constitution. A debt ceiling was a statute enacted, I think it was during the Gingrich time in Congress, and the idea is you can only go so high with the national debt and no higher. And obviously it was an effort to bring home the fact that we've got to keep spending and debt to a reasonable level. Now remember, the national budget is not like your house budget. Never ever compare your family's budget to the national budget, because the full faith and credit of the United States works differently. We can go into debt, we can stay in debt, that's fine. As long as we make the debt service, in other words, we pay the interest payments on the debt, that's fine going forward. And as long as you keep that to a reasonable level, you're all right. But at some point, it gets so big that the debt service on it, the interest payments that you pay every year,
$500 billion currently.
Yeah, that sounds right. That becomes stifling. And you start to think, well, I'd rather spend that $500 billion on, creating new ports or railroads or sewer systems or water system, or assets that we could buy for the United States or defense. But the bottom line is that the debt ceiling is a fiction that is created by statute, and the problem is that if you don't make your payments on the debt, you have defaulted on the national debt, and that is the big danger. And so when it is
dangerous for our country.
It is utterly dangerous, and when you have folks like Scott Perry threatening to crash the national debt, in other words, for the United States of America to fail to make payments as they come due, What that means is that the full faith and credit of the United States becomes impaired, and all of a sudden interest rates, not only in this country but all over the world, go up, and they may go up 2%, 3%, they could go up 5%, because it has to, interest rates always reflect in part the risk of non-repayment. And that's why if you have a bad credit score, you pay higher interest than people with a good credit score.
Of course.
It's the same free market analysis. And so if we crash the national debt, interest rates go up here and all over the world, which will cause a recession all over the world and conceivably a depression. Now, if you want to do that just to make a political point that we should spend less, you don't need to do that. And in my heart of hearts, I don't think the Republicans will do that. I know they're trying to take hostage paying our debts as they come due, but I don't think it's a good play. And I don't think that's the right thing to do, because if we were to default on the national debt, it would mean economic hardship for everybody. Millions and millions of Americans would lose their jobs, and that would also be true all over the world. I think the right approach is a balanced one. Think back in history. When was the last time we reduced the national debt? And that was under Bill Clinton. Now, I don't give Bill Clinton all the credit, as you know, because the guy holding his arm bent behind Bill Clinton's back was Newt Gingrich.
Of course.
And of course, both sides wanted to reduce the national debt. Bill Clinton campaigned on that in 1992, or I remember it. But the approach they took was a balanced one, Chuck. It's not just about slashing spending. We still have to have national defense, an army, a navy.
Sure.
We still have to have spending on economic development projects. We have to hire all sorts of federal employees to take care of things. But you can cut those things, but I think you have to have a balanced approach, which means cutting spending on the one hand and increasing revenue on the other hand. A big part of the national debt that exists today, and it's over $30 trillion right now, a big part of it came about after 2017, when we had these massive tax cuts for corporations, and 86% of those tax cuts benefited the top 1% and big American corporations. And I think a reasonable approach would be to retrench on those a little bit. Take some of that back. When Eisenhower was the president, the top marginal tax rate was 95%. John F. Kennedy came along. I know he's one of your heroes.
He is.
John F. Kennedy came along and brought it down to 70%. Okay? The top corporations and the top 1% of this country are not paying 70% tax right now. They're paying in the 20s. And so,
in Donald Trump's case, it was about 20,000, not even percent, 1,000. Go ahead.
Right. We're not sure how well that's going to hold up.
Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to find out who his accountants were myself, but go ahead.
Nevertheless, the point is that the ultra-wealthy can afford to pay a little bit more of their fair share of taxes, and that's what I'd like to see. A tandem approach, a balanced approach, cutting spending where it can be cut and increasing revenue where it can be increased.
We are here today again with our United States Congressman from the 8th Congressional District, Matt Cartwright, who won 6th term?
6th term.
6 terms. I remember you were here on your first, 10 years of this show, by the way. And as you know, has been one of our most popular and best guests. Well, at any rate, he's going to tell you about rail to New York City when we come back, as I said, as well as some anecdotes and stories I think you'll enjoy hearing. So stay tuned for this message. We'll be right back. I recently read an editorial by New York Times writer Ross Douthat, who, besides writing editorial columns for the New York Times, published a book 10 years ago entitled Bad Religion: How We Became a Nation of Heretics. In his own words, Douthat says that secularization wasn't a useful label for the transition of a nation to one where John Lennon's song, Imagine, was its anthem. Douthat reasoned in his book this was so because, quote, American culture seems still fascinated with the figure Jesus, still in favor of divine favor and transcendence, end quote. But those interests, he observed, were much less likely to be channeled through Christian churches that maintain some connection to historical orthodoxies. Quoting, instead, our longtime national impulse toward heresy, the personalized revisions of Christian doctrine, finally has completed its victory over Christian institutions and traditions. For a surprising result, the Pew Research Center modeled potential futures for American religion. The results were astounding. In the 1970s and the 1980s, not surprisingly, around 90% of Americans identified as Christian. Now there are a majority of projections that in the next 50 years, that number drops below 50%. Douthit now editorializes 10 years later that American Christianity has become a church of self-love, with prophets like Oprah Winfrey or Joel Osteen, with churches of politics, with heresies such as a Christian nationalism on the right and progressive utopianism on the left. Douthit presaged the rise of Trump on the right. Trump's connection to Christianity was his attendance at Norman Vincent Peale's church. Douthit cites that Trump became Peale's right-wing heir, which were appealing to the disciples of nationalistic evangelicalism. On the left, however, it was more. I quote, liberalism ended up infused by heresy to a degree that even I didn't see coming. The idea of wokeness didn't figure in my book, Bad Religion, which came out before the new wave of campus activities, Black Lives Matter, #MeToo, and the diversity, equity, inclusion era. But the Great Awakening is a perfect example of Christian spiritual energies cut loose from orthodox belief. Social justice progressivism has to be understood, in part, as a spiritual descendant of Puritanism, end quote. Douthit concludes in today's editorial that Jesus is less culturally central and less necessary to religious entrepreneurs. He sees a post-Christian label as the new state of affairs. But he draws hope and uses the Christmas season as the metaphor. He concludes, I quote, Advent and Christmas aren't about trends extending as before. They're about rupture, renewal, rebirth. That's what American Christianity needs now. Now as ever. Now as in those first days when its whole future was contained in the mystery and vulnerability of a mother and a child, end quote. Welcome back. Again, we're here with our United States Congressman from the 8th Congressional District, which takes in a big chunk of this media market, Matt Cartwright. And Matt, as we had talked about heading into this segment, I've been reading all over the headlines and with great optimism and faith in you, because you have taken, this is your baby. I know you'll need a lot of help from a lot of different places, but you were the visionary that talked about this even when no one would talk to you about it, including our former Democratic governor. But we have a new Democratic governor who is interested, and there's clearly an appetite. So I've read it in headlines. It appears to be real now. So take it from there. This is your project.
Yeah, well, restoring passenger rail between New York City and northeastern Pennsylvania has been a priority of mine. It's something I never really campaigned on because you don't want to promise something you're not sure you can deliver. But I've been working on it, and I have been promising to work on it. Over the years, we've learned a lot. We've had a lot of heartaches. We've run up against some massive roadblocks. I wouldn't say Governor Wolf was one of them. He has helped in his way. Along the way, we were working under the assumption that it would have to be the Federal Transit Administration, the FTA, that would be the federal component of funding for the railroad. They pay 50%, and the other 50% has to be sourced locally. So that means state and local governments, Pennsylvania government, New Jersey government in Trenton, and the counties that stand to benefit, and perhaps even some of the cities. But we're talking about something that's enormously expensive, rebuilding a railroad, and that's where we're...
Over $100 million?
It could be over it could be over $1 billion.
$1 billion?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. I was way off.
Well, I know it's hard to wrap your head around how much it costs, but one thing you have to include is the number of train sets. Yes, they call them train sets, but they come in sets, and they have a locomotive, and they have all the passenger cars, and you have to have one more set than you're always using, so that one set's in for maintenance.
Right.
And each one of those is $100 million.
Oh, well, there you.
Sure.
Wow.
It's hard to envision the scale.
Wow.
But think about 50% of that coming from the local areas and the state government. That was a tough sell, and we were kind of spinning our wheels. But at the same time, we were kind of doing a lot of spade work. We raised $400,000 through various sources to conduct studies on how much it'll cost to repair the bridge over the Delaware, and there's another bridge called the Paulins Kill Viaduct on the Jersey side. Sometimes it's a little scary how much it'll be to fix a bridge, and you need to have a good number on that. We did that. We did those studies. We got our ducks in line, and along came the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Now, this was the big infrastructure bill that we were writing in the House. It was the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee that was putting it together. Chairman Peter DeFazio from Oregon was doing it. And he was well into writing this when we found out something that dismayed DeFazio, and that was the Senate was writing their own version.
Okay.
And Senate Leader Chuck Schumer was at the head of that.
From New York.
From New York, from Brooklyn. And as soon as I found that out, I got a hold of a dear old friend of mine, also from New York City area, Queens, Joe Crowley. Okay. And you may remember Joe Crowley. He was a prominent member of Democratic House leadership and a congressman from Queens, New York. He and I have become great friends over the years. In fact, I got him to be the main speaker at the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick dinner, and he gave such a great speech there. They were all pretty much crying for the old sod.
Right.
And Joe and I are great friends. Anyway, he was out of Congress. Remember AOC primaried him and
I
beat
didn't know
him?
that was the one she primaried.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we were sorry to see Joe go, and I stayed in touch with him. Anyway, I found out Chuck Schumer was writing this infrastructure bill, and I called up Crowley. I said, look, you guys from New York all flock together. Can you get me an appointment to talk to Leader Schumer? Yeah. He said, sure, Matt. Yeah. And a couple of months later, I'm in my kitchen in Music on my laptop. Right. We were all doing Zooms at the time, in COVID. There's Schumer, there's Crowley, there's John Blake. Okay. And Schumer sees me, and he looks up, and he knows Crowley's a professional Irishman. And he looks at me, he says, Matt, I don't think we've talked before, Schumer says. He says, are you Irish? And I said, as the day is long. At which point, Chuck Schumer began to sing me an Irish ballad.
Wow.
And he had a good voice.
Wow.
I didn't know what to say.
I would never attempt such a feat myself.
I didn't know what to say. I said, Leader Schumer, this is indeed an auspicious way to begin a Zoom call with you, sir. He says, yeah, what do you want? Yeah. Well, I said, well, you're putting together an infrastructure package, and we were hoping you'd add an extra $2 billion into the bucket for new rail starts. Right. And he looked off screen for about 2 seconds, and he looked back to the screen, and he said, yeah, we can do that.
Wow. Wow.
Now remember, that's not, and they did it. Wow. Now that's not necessarily for us. Right. We still have to compete for it, but the more money that's in that bucket, the better our chances.
Right, and just getting a percentage of that with all the other sources where the state can help. Some of what you guys have passed in Congress over the last couple of years, the COVID bill, obviously, and the infrastructure bill as well, and the Inflation Reduction Bill. You're talking about several $1 trillion, which has worked its way into various coffers for both the state government, one of the reasons Josh Shapiro was inheriting a pretty nice surplus for a change.
They are flush in Harrisburg.
Well,
right
look what it did. What you helped bring, for example, to the city of Scranton, which smoothed their way into out of distress status. I should put it that way. The Scranton School District goes from like a $20 million deficit to like a $20 million surplus. So the point of the story is that there is now money in the local governments, in the cities and in the counties and in the boroughs and in the state to help.
Right. In addition to putting them in a position not having to raise your local taxes,
is big.
It helps them do projects. I was talking about the IIJA. The other big victory about that was that it includes $11.3 billion for abandoned mine reclamation,
which we have a ton of here.
And that's to be split among 4 states: Kentucky, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia.
Sure.
And that's huge for our area. Right now, I just came from a meeting today where one of the towns in the Mid-Valley are looking at reclaiming a big coal dump and turning it into a community center and apartment buildings.
Wow.
Much of that with federal money that's sitting right there. So I want you to know I worked really hard to get that IIJA across the goal line, and one of the biggest obstacles was that there were voices out there that wanted to combine that with, you remember, the reconciliation package?
Of course, Build Back Better, right?
Yeah, became Build Back Better and other things. It was over $3 trillion of additional spending, and I said, we've got to decouple them. We can't hold the infrastructure bill hostage to the other one.
Right.
Because the infrastructure bill has bipartisan support, the other one not so much.
Right.
So I was able to prevail on Democratic House leadership, and some other voices chimed in as well, but we got that done by itself. I was there on the South White House lawn for the signing of the IIJA, but there's so many good things for northeastern Pennsylvania in it, and our chances of getting passenger rail went way, way up because of that.
One of the difficulties of New York, even though it's relatively close in mileage, is getting in and out of the city by car. It's just adds an hour.
You don't have to imagine the economic opportunity, because Amtrak has already measured it, and they have studied it, and they have a basis for their calculations. They started a new line from Boston up north to Portland, Maine. It's about the same length of a trip. And based on their studies and what happened, first they had two trains going a day each way, then they had to go to 3 right away, then they had to go to 5. Now they're considering 6 trains each way because of the demand. It's like priming the pump. But they measured, according to their calculations, this line, this Scranton, down through the Poconos, Mount Pocono, Delaware Water Gap, and then across New Jersey to New York City, will create $84 million per year, every year, in additional economic activity. So it's $84 million the first year, double that by the second year. And
exponential increase.
And that's what I'm after. There are a lot of people that like to take videotapes of trains going by.
Right.
I like trains as much as the next guy, but what I'm after are the jobs and the economic prosperity this can bring to northeastern Pennsylvania.
No question about it. Congressman, believe it or not, our time has run through. As always, it's good to see you, Matt. Thanks for being on. And look forward to bringing you back as we continue along in this way. I think right now, even more so than the state, the things that are happening in Washington are necessary now to deal with some of the problems. Inflation, the energy situation, the infrastructure bill and how it's applied. These are matters that even transcend what's going on in the state. So you're one of our persons. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for having me, Chuck.
Again, we're here today with our 8th District United States Congressman, leader in the Democratic House, has been a leader for this area for all 6 terms he's been there. I'm happy to call him a friend. We don't always agree politically on the ideas, but I can tell you this, whenever we do disagree, his thoughts are have conviction and integrity, and we agree to disagree. I hope more of our country and more of his colleagues can have that sort of relationship with him that I know exists. So at any rate, again, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next Sunday at 10:30.